Welcome to Spottable AF, the podcast that's unfiltered, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. My name is Kate Ball, international talent strategist, author of the Culture Chronicles series, and founder of Sparkle and SAS Consulting. I've spent the last 2 decades shaking up the status quo in HR, and now I'm teaming up with WeCP to bring you candid conversations with the voices redefining the future of work. If you're tired of the same old corporate fluff, you're in the right place. So let's get to it. Today, I'm being joined by Len Syriaque. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. A distinguished talent acquisition leader with over 2 decades of experience spanning government agencies and the private sector. His expertise extends to developing human-centered strategies that prioritize employee engagement and organizational effectiveness. In today's discussion, Len and I will be discussing his insights on navigating talent acquisition and management in a post-DEI landscape, emphasizing the importance of fostering inclusive and adaptive workplace cultures. So please join me in welcoming Len, very, very good friend, Len Syriaque. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Great, amazing. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi. First off, Kate, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I really do appreciate it. So Len Syriaque, I've been in talent acquisition for about, 26 years now. Started out as an executive recruiter and then got my way into corporate recruiting, worked in fintech, worked in global talent acquisition teams. I've done it all. And currently right now, I'm the assistant deputy superintendent with a New York State agency, the Department of Financial Services. There I support talent strategies and also work on the culture of the organization.
And so I was saying to you just before we went live, but I really want to call out again. I think it's incredibly brave of you to be willing to come and talk about this subject matter today. I'm not so sure I would have the same guts, but I'm very appreciative because, as we've discussed, I think it's a conversation that not only needs to happen, but also people want to learn more about. Yeah. So today we're going to be focused, essentially, as the title suggests, on a post-DEI world. We've all seen the headlines. We've all heard the news, the proclaims of DEI being dead. We've all seen things happening in businesses around the world, particularly in North America, with regards to budgets being cut, initiatives being rolled back, references to DEI work being stripped from websites and from literature, and particularly within the government with our new president, that being a very clear message that there is essentially a war on DEI right now. So, Len, you're on the inside. Can you tell us a bit about what's happening, how it's feeling? Is the news really giving us an accurate picture of what's going on right now?
Yes. And what I'll say is that I think, right now, the optics, have really had a lot of people shy away from being participants, in trying to push initiatives, that are under DEI. But more importantly, I think what's going on right now is, you have a lot of people who don't really understand what DEI really is. I think the acronym itself has become, somewhat nefarious, where people say DEI. You can ask some people what DEI stands for, and they do not know what DEI stands for. It's been said that if you actually say diversity, equity, and inclusion, sometimes people say belonging at the end, sometimes people say accessibility, then people get a better understanding of what the program is. DEI started back in 1865. You can trail it back to Civil War veterans that came back from the war and were giving preferential treatment for jobs, and widows that lost their husbands in the war were given preferential treatment to get jobs too as well. So essentially, it's a human-centered initiative to help people, help disabled people, help people who are who need opportunities as far as veterans. People who are underserved. Everyone needs a focus, in our society. Everyone needs a chance. And, these programs, were basically built to give everyone an opportunity to be productive in our societies. And I think, if it's explained that way, more people can get a better understanding of what DEI is. And you'll see that DEI is actually employee engagement. It's a part of the culture of your organization too as well. So when they talk about pulling back on DEI, depending on the industry, it means a lot of different things. And I think
sorry, go on.
It means a lot of different things. And, to the public, it seems like doomsday. On the federal government side, obviously, it is doomsday, for those DEI practitioners, because they've been pulled out of their roles and they've been villainized. But at the center of it is still human-centered. It's still the government supporting its people when it comes to government agencies. It's still corporations trying to find the best talent out of a different well, out of a different pipeline, instead of going to the same places, and accommodating people, where they need that help.
That makes a lot of sense. And obviously, you mentioned working within a government agency, people being villainized. From your vantage point, how has that affected employee morale, like experience and engagement inside the agencies that you interact with?
Well, being that we're a state agency, we're not a government agency. I mean, we're not a federal agency, excuse me. We're a state agency. And I work here in New York. So, it's a different field. But, the vibe is still the same. People don't want to be associated, with certain programs because they feel that they'll be next on the hit list too as well. That's the vibe you get.
Which is really scary, particularly since so many of us working in HR have spent years, if not decades, campaigning for this work to come to a forefront. Mm-hmm. How much do you apportion blame, if blame is even the right word, and I'm not sure it is, but obviously the last 5 years have been unprecedented with the COVID pandemic, racial inequities coming to the forefront. How much of this do you think is based on an overcorrection as opposed to an evolution of a concept?
Oh, that's a great question. It's hard for me to pinpoint, which is which. An overcorrection, I'm not sure that's it. An evolution, most likely, because now we have a change of mindset, within the government. And that's leading the charge, as to, what's going on right now. But I feel that, those mindsets were always present, but now, those mindsets have a power and they have a voice, and and they're being pushed forward. But at the center of everything, at the platform of this is still people. If we do not educate people, if we do not hire people, if we do not train people, we're going to have a bigger issue, than what we think we have. Everyone should have an opportunity to work. Everyone should have an opportunity, to be successful, in this country, in this world, and these programs basically support that. They support training for people. They support accessibility for people, reasonable accommodations. All those things, are there for companies to do better, for profit. And I think if we look at it, if we reposition, what the initiative is and see it through different eyes, then there would be much more support for it across the board. In corporations, if you find a deaf programmer, you're going to hire that person. If you don't hire that person, the next agency, the next company is going to hire that person. So what do? You find the right resources to make sure you can communicate with that person and that person can succeed in that role. What we do in the government, you're about to say, I'm sorry.
I was going to play devil's advocate, not because I believe it, but because I know it's how it's being argued right now. Why would you hire that deaf person over and above anybody else? I think the argument has been that unfair advantages have been given on the basis of people's disabilities or whatever characteristic we're discussing at the time. And so just to not push back, but to represent the other viewpoint.
Yeah.
Let's just focus on that. Why is it so important, in your opinion, to hire that deaf engineer or blind, whatever?
Because they are the best candidate, not because of their disability, because they are the best candidate, because they passed the coding tests, because they went way and far beyond what you've seen with other candidates, because you can see an opportunity for this person to grow, because you can see this person lead, because this person understands the technology better than other people within the group. And I think that's an important part to stress. We're not giving golden tickets to people. We're giving people an opportunity to work. We're letting people know that, hey, we're letting veterans know that don't be shy. You can come over here and work for us. We're letting people with disabilities know, hey, we have reasonable accommodations. And that's why we ask on the applications to make sure that we can accommodate you when you come to the job.
And the other thing that you haven't mentioned, but and I'm sorry to interject, but I just want to make sure that point is known, because this is a topic I'm passionate about as well, is the importance of that diversity of thought. Having people that see through different lenses, who interact with things in different way and have different experiences, brings an opportunity to optimize and to get ahead of problems. So having a deaf engineer may interact with your product in a different way than somebody who is not hearing impaired does. And that gives you insights, and those insights are valuable. You can't come by those by any other way. So if you are targeting a product or a service or your business to support a diverse community, having diverse representation working on it is only a benefit. But it's not even a benefit, it's a prerequisite, I would say.
Exactly. And that's where I look at things. DEI is not an off-the-shelf product. It's not something that you can, pull off the shelf and put into every government agency. You can't put it into every corporation, and it's not going to work the same. You have to understand the mission of your corporation. You have to understand the culture of your organization, right? And then try to figure out what is the best strategy as far as talent moving forward. We see a lot of companies when it comes to technology. I've done a lot of technical recruiting. We always go to the same schools. You go to the same schools where some of your current employees have graduated. You bring them along, and they can speak as ambassadors, which is a great thing. But there's also opportunities to go outside of that. When I'm hearing impaired, there are a lot of different places that you can go locally if you just look and give people those opportunities to do that. And that's what DEI is, finding those opportunities, finding those people and letting them know, hey, you can be part of this interview process. I will try to do the best I can to interview you on an equal basis. If there is, some products or services that we need to implement to make sure that we can hear you and we can communicate with you properly, we'll do that, right? If it's not going to be an impediment to our budget too as well. And that's part of the requirements. If it's not an impediment, if it's not going to make your company go under by adding these products and services, you should go forward and do it. And there are a lot of different incentives, with local agencies that can provide those services for those employees too as well. So if you really want it, you can go out and get it.
Okay. And I know we spoke briefly before, but this feels like a good time to talk about the fact that I have been very vocal in my networks, in my books, about the fact that despite sensationalist media screaming headlines of DEI is dead and this doom and gloom mentality, I personally don't believe that. I believe that DEI is evolving. Absolutely. I believe that the way in which DEI is represented in companies is changing. I can only talk from a corporate perspective because that's my background, but I equate it to any type of change we've seen throughout history. Like, car manufacturers with seatbelts. When seatbelts first came out, you needed a team to go out and educate people on the importance of using a seatbelt, why it was important. You needed people to actually mandate and rigorously check and report on that being happening and being done correctly.
Exactly.
And then we reach a point in evolution where everybody knows to wear a seatbelt. They know the bad things that happen if you don't. And you no longer need that safety engineer to focus on that project and program. And I personally have seen in corporations that, I mean, Amazon most recently, but also businesses I've been consulting with that previously had separate departments, separate initiatives that are now being baked into the all up talent or people strategy. So it's not necessarily that this work has gone away. It's just, it looks different. It sounds different. It no longer requires its own landing page on a website because it's so embedded in the corporate culture already. But that's just my viewpoint. And I appreciate not everybody shares it. I'd love to know your viewpoint, particularly coming from, as you said, the State Department, where things have been so focused and so kind of overemphasized.
Yeah, I think the playbook has changed, but the mission is the same. Help the people. How do we help the people? Do we change the language? And I think, I've had conversations with people where, they would feel more comfortable, with getting rid of the acronym, but still, moving forward with the mission. When you look at ERGs, it's an opportunity for employees to find a safe space, to celebrate who they are and share, their different cultures, with the greater population of employees. That's a great opportunity to understand people, to find out things about people that you didn't know, and educate yourself, but going back to what you said, yes, these things have evolved. They've been embedded, into our practices. When we're looking at talent strategies, when we're looking at reasonable accommodations, when we're looking at how do we promote people? How do we retrain people? All those things. Learning and development is definitely a DEI initiative because, you're training people, right? You're giving people an opportunity to upskill, where they don't have those particular skills. So if you really want to nitpick, that should we get rid of learning and development? No, we don't do that. So it's changing the language. I think the optics right now are very overwhelming, and people who are not going deep into the topic can get swept away, and they can go with the opinions. But if you really take the time and pull back the covers and look at how each organization or specific organizations or agencies have impacted people and products and services, you'll see that the DEI effect has been a great part of that. Because you need diverse ideas, you need diverse skills to get to that next level. You can't keep going to that same well, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I always want to say, you want the best candidate. It's not, we're not rolling out the carpet for any one person. We're just letting people know that we're looking at everyone. We're not just looking at a certain segment. The pipeline is bigger.
Okay. And from your experience, what does it look like or what does it feel like to protect those marginalized voices when even the language surrounding inclusion is under fire and scrutiny?
Well, it's a tightrope. I think all in all, you have to understand, what can your culture, your organizational culture, accept? Who's willing to speak and who's not willing to speak too as well. I think right now it's still evolving to the point where, it's more of quiet conversations as opposed to, published conversations. You're going out, people really don't want to, put themselves out there, just yet. And then this is a, government agency, so you tread lightly. Being that this is New York State, we still have Executive Order 31, which was, pushed by Kathy Holcomb, which basically states that, you recruit, promote people with disabilities. You make sure that we can go out and find those diverse talents, give them an opportunity to interview with you.
And I appreciate it may not be appropriate, so we can skip over it if so, but are you able to provide any examples from your lived experience where you've had to translate DEI language or work into more politically friendly terminology in recent months?
In what sense? Are you talking about, talent acquisition? Or are you talking about external, internal?
I'm just wondering if we've both agreed that the work is evolving. I'm just wondering if it's coming under different banners or if you've got any examples of situations where virtually identical work, say ERGs, are now being called something radically different just to tick the box.
Yeah, you know what?
We're hearing about those examples sometimes.
The best I can say is conversations. Nothing has, been, executed at this point, but, it's more of a wait and see. It's more of a, we'll continue to do what we're doing, on the back end to make sure that, people are getting what they need. But I think a lot of things are next level. When you think about an ERG is a next level, opportunity. It's part of the cultural experience, but it's still a next level opportunity. Where you want the employees to have enough strength to lead these initiatives. Because ERGs are employee-led organizations. So you need these employees to feel comfortable enough to do what they need to do, to speak up, to come out, have events, and be comfortable, in their skin. I always say that if you cannot be yourself at work, it's not going to work. So, just making sure that people can be comfortable and find those comfortable spaces for themselves.
Okay, and shifting gears slightly, let's face it, apart from the last few months where, again, I use the term unprecedented, but the introduction of Doge and everything that's happened since inauguration day seems to have happened at warp speed. But traditionally, the perception of public service government agencies is that they move at a glacial pace. There's so much red tape involved that it can take forever to move the needle. So from your experience, what's been key to driving transformation that's actually people first when working in that type of environment?
I think it has to go with the agency's initiative. Each agency has a different initiative, just like every corporation has a different initiatives. And it's understanding that initiative and the goals of the organization and the people. For instance, DFS, what we do, we're regulators in New York State. So we make sure that all New Yorkers, their information, within different industries within New York, are safe. It could be within banking, it could be within insurance. It could be making sure that people in underserved neighborhoods are not overcharged in check cashing. It could be, millionaires who are on crypto and making sure that their information is secure on those particular sites and in the regulation. So we are from every New Yorker from beginning to end, right? So it's how do we translate that, to the public, and how do we make sure that our employees, feel the same too as well. The thing about government, we're human-centered. We're focused on the people and how can we help the people. So I think if that's always in sight, no matter what we do, we talk about the people. If I go to a career fair, and I see some talent, I want to make sure that talent is seen. I want to make sure that talent gets an opportunity to where they need to be. If I see an employee, struggling, in the office, maybe they need a reasonable accommodation. Let them know, hey, you should apply for this. Take it forward. So those types of things, learning and development, making sure that people are upskilled, making sure that they have the same opportunities that other people have internally. So, those things are always, front of mind. So that's the best way, I could say. And I know other agencies, do the same thing too as well. They may not promote it in the same way, but I think, at the core, we're all about making sure that people can do a good job and we can be successful, together.
Okay. Not everyone has the benefit of having a forward-thinking, diverse thinking leader like yourself. leading the charge, though. So what advice would you have for HR practitioners out there that are trying to change legacy systems and fighting against this current wave of anti-DEI sentiment?
Well, that's a large ticket. I would say understanding the environment first is very important. Why people do the things they do, why things are done in a certain way. Working for a government agency, there are a lot of rules and regulations. You have your civil service. So things are done for a reason, as opposed in corporate America where, it's more done, for the shareholders,
or the profit. Yeah.
Well, the profit. For here, it's for the people, and so it's understanding, what's been done in the past, how successful has it been, and then how can you, imitate that success, in this current market right now, in this current environment, and then understanding who are your champions too as well. Who can you get, to champion your projects, to say, all right, this is going to be effective. And then the most important part of it is data. What sort of data can you present to show that, this project is going to be successful? What impact is this project going to have too as well? Is it about efficiency? Is it about, uncovering new products or services? You have to be very direct and very, explicit as to, what you're trying to accomplish. But I would say data is the most important thing, to lead with right now. And, right now in this environment, it's a hard thing, with AI, with all the optics, more people get their news off of TikTok than they do off of, regular news channels, so you're competing with a lot of different things. But I think it's understanding your environment and how it works first, and then going backwards from there, is the best approach.
Okay. And coming back to what we discussed, this theory of evolution, obviously things change over time. And we were discussing before we press record about some of the changes that we've just seen since we both started working in recruiting and HR. Can you think of something like a hot take item that used to be best practice that you've either stopped doing or you wish you could encourage others to stop doing? Because now there's just a better way.
Stop doing. That's a great question. I think you stumped me on that one.
I'll give you one example, one that I'm really passionate about, and it ties in. So I am a big proponent of eliminating education requirements unless the degree actually translates to what the job entails. Because my goodness, I don't know stats. I hate made up percentages, but if I had to put money on it, I'd say over 90% of jobs paying over 50K a year require a degree. And very few of those actually translate to what the degree has taught an individual. So that for me is ridiculous. And I hate seeing that as knockout criteria. OFCCP regulations are something that I had to work very closely with at Amazon. And to know that if you've put that as a basic requirement and somebody is the best skilled person you could find, they've done the exact same job everywhere else, but the fact that they don't have that degree and can't tick that bullet point means that legally you cannot even interview them, just blows my mind. So to me, revising how we kind of assess candidates and the criteria we put in place, that's something that I wish everybody would revisit, revamp, and stop doing. But can you think of any other examples you've come across?
I would definitely like to piggyback on that one too, as well. Education requirements, are a tough one too, as well. As we see that, when we look at technology, let's just say, technical positions, a lot of people, are inherently, intelligent with technology where, they learn to code themselves, right? And they go to a boot camp and they learn it themselves. And, they can be equally impactful, just as well as the person who went to MIT, and did the job too as well. I would say, yeah, educational requirements, and to a certain degree, effective interviewing too as well. I think what I see a lot in my experience, with managers, is that people interview people just to talk. They just want to get questions out there, and they're not really focusing on the impactful part of what needs to be spoken about. There's a lot of fluff, that goes into the interview process. But I think now with technology, it's kind of made things a little more complicated too as well. Where you would have people show up, and not be that person, or they're reading scripts as you're talking to them, in those types of ways. I would like to see a better way of evaluating people, and I don't know what it is, but I think there has to be a better way of evaluating people. And you see all these job posts that are on LinkedIn that are out there, and they're out there for months. They get reposted, and you say to yourself, how could that job be reposted if there's so many people out here looking for opportunities, out there? So those things, kind of get me, in the market, right now. And even, prior to the market, I've always wondered about that. I've been in situations where I know, they'll put something up because they anticipate an opportunity opening up, or they're trying to build that pipeline. But I think right now where we sit, there has to be a little more consideration given to candidates, when they're looking for those opportunities, in that sense. And I think maybe recruiters, are better trained, to identify talent too as well. And I think that's a big part of it.
I feel like I couldn't have paid you to segue me better. I'll have to send you a commission check because you don't even know this. But I literally have written a book about skills-based hiring and how I feel like the whole recruitment process is so outdated.
It is.
And rewards spin over skill and kind of confidence over competence.
Exactly.
And my entire book is a playbook trying to break down, here's how you move towards a different way. It's not as scary as it sounds. This is a step-by-step of what you can do. So thank you for plugging that. It's called Prove It.
No worries. Great minds think alike. But I think it's something. If you're in HR, you're going to see these things come up, and there's been a lot of different ways people have tried to approach it, but I still think it's a big issue right now in the market. Even more so because now we have a surplus of talent, and there are a lot of people out there. There's no reason jobs should be reposted for 3 months out in this market.
Yeah. And keeping an eye on time, we're coming up to that 30-minute mark. I want to leave us looking ahead, optimistic, and bring it back to your personal experience. So what gives you hope about the next generation of public service leaders?
I think, those that are growing up in this era right now, they have an opportunity to have technology, at their fingertips. So there's a lot of research, that can be done. There's a lot of impactful things that can be done as far as time management, and finding different ways to communicate too as well, with people. I think in the end, we're all looking for the same thing. We're all looking for an opportunity where we can work somewhere, be impactful, be respected for what you do, but more importantly, given that opportunity to be there, right? You want that opportunity. If your resume fits the job, you should get an opportunity to interview, period. Maybe you're not a fit culturally. Maybe you're not a fit technically because they were looking for something else. That's okay, but you should get that opportunity. And if you get that job, you should get an opportunity to be retrained. If you need additional support, you should get that additional support too as well. And that's just the way I say it. It should just be an open playing field. But obviously, different industries have different motives. And that should be taken into consideration too as well.
Great answer. And I love that. All right. Before I wrap us up, though, Len, any final thoughts? Our topic today, human-centered strategy in a post-DEI landscape. Obviously, we went a little off track, but I think we stayed pretty true to the subject matter. But anything that we didn't discuss that you wanted to make a point of sharing today?
I think it all boils down to, communication, communication over rhetoric. Politics aside, if we are focusing on the human-centered, things, we want to make sure that, everyone gets what they need to be successful. I think I've said it a couple of times, we want to make sure that, because in the end, we are the shepherds, of those, who need our help. In the government, we try to help everyone. In corporations, you try to help everyone that fits the bill. But in both situations, everyone should get an opportunity to be successful, regardless of race, creed, education, or ability. At that particular moment, everyone should have an opportunity to be successful, and we should find ways to help them. That's the bottom line of all this. Do you really want to help people? That's it. And I think that's what it boils down. Do you want to help people? And I hope that we get to a point where there's more clarity on that. Obviously, I'm not looking for a utopian society. I know that's never going to come, but I'm just looking for a better understanding of this particular situation. Where we can see things forward and get things moving the way they should be.
Great sentiments. And yeah, I think it sounds trite because I say it so often, but all we can really do is be the change that we want to see.
Yep.
I think there's so many voices out there right now, but I see less action than I hear people talking.
Yep.
And I wish it was the other way around. And it takes someone like you that's brave enough to kind of put the head above the pulpit and actually talk about it, but also be in the background doing it.
Yep.
And so for everybody who's watching and participating in this, the one thing that I would stress is nothing is going to change unless you are part of the change.
Exactly.
It's not always easy. If it was, everybody would already be doing it. But that's why it's even more important. Yeah. And ultimately, this is work that's not going away.
No, people aren't going away. People need work, and so this topic is not going to go away.
No,
we have to work together.
And 50 years from now, we're going to be advocating for people versus robots. So practice those skills now. It gets easier the more you do it.
I think I'm going to be out of service by then, but hopefully the foundation that we put down now, will help support that cause, when it comes.
Exactly. Let's teach those behaviors so people can practice them over the next 20 however years, so that when the time comes, they're successful.
Yeah.
All right, Len. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. If it's all right with you, I will share your LinkedIn in our ending slide, so anybody that wants to reach out to you directly and continue the conversation or ask any questions we didn't get to today can do so. Is that okay?
Fair enough.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time. And yeah, I will follow up with you.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Bye.